Thanks for staying with us. Let's bring you the highlights. Of course, we're going to bring you the highlights later of the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial, which today was uncovering more details about the alleged murder weapon. And Crisalda Lewis will bring us that in just a moment. But let's go to this particular conversation. The Competition Commission has found that Google's dominance and business model distorts a platform competition in South Africa and imposed several constraints on the search giant. Now, it also took a dim view of price parity requirements for platforms like Booking.com and imposed these on customers, preventing them from listing services and products that are more cheaply on rival sites. And now this was the Commission's online Intermediation Platforms Market Inquiry report, which was released on Monday. Let's speak now to the Competition Commission's Market Inquiry Online Intermediation Platform Chair, James Hodge, who joins us live now. This raises a lot of questions, James. I mean, you think about just how many people would use Google to search, and they use desktops, computers, or even tablets or mobile devices. Tell us how all of this works for somebody who doesn't understand what your findings would mean.
Yeah, you're right. I think digital economy is now part of our lives, and COVID has made it part of our lives. But Google certainly prior to that was even an important part of our life. But what we have tried to look at is what hinders competition between platforms. So consumers can get the best choice, they can get the best and most innovative platforms. But also a big focus of the inquiry was on the business users that use these platforms. And that's a side the consumer doesn't always see. So, for instance, on food delivery, you wouldn't know that the restaurants necessarily charged a large commission, that they put that through in a surcharge on their menu. And depending on which platform and the size of their commission, the bigger the menu surcharge. So I think it is important for this report and also the process that we've gone through for consumers to also educate themselves. So on Google in particular, the top, as most people know, are adverts. And they are filtered in terms of relevance as one factor, but it's also what you've paid for that advert. So what you find is that consumers tend to click near the top of a page. They don't scroll down much, and they don't go to the sort of organic results. But what we found is that it means that big business and big platforms can dominate that top page of Google. And so smaller platforms, South African platforms, they might be relevant to consumers, don't necessarily get the visibility and discoverability and use.
And that also limits the kind of decisions then that as consumers will then have to make. Because if that is at the top and is the first thing that I'm clicking on, it means I'm not exposed to an array of other options that could be available.
That's right. And you know, one benefit is Google does mark those as ads or sponsored. But we also found most of your South African platforms don't even label those ads. So people are paid to appear at the top. And sometimes they're even given, you know, labels such as a premium listing or featured listing, suggesting that, in fact, this is an important listing that you should take note of. It's appropriate to your inquiry, but in fact it's just a paid ad to appear there. So another far-reaching remedy we have put in place is that for local platforms, they must label as advertising anything which is paid to be in a particular position will get a ranking boost. And in that respect, we've had support from the Advertising Regulatory Board that has already changed its rules on that. But as they're a voluntary organization, we've had the need to impose that on them.
And there's also, of course, you know, concerns even around the narrowing of the price parity as far as Booking.com is concerned. And I'm sure a lot of people on this one, you know, have found themselves clicking on that site a lot of the times because it appears right at the top of a search when you're looking for a place to go.
Yeah, so price parity, I'm glad you raised that. We've seen that in food delivery, we've seen that in e-commerce, and it's particularly prominent in travel. But, you know, we used to have quite a big domestic travel platform service, providing a good service to domestic travelers for local and regional travel. And now that space is dominated by Booking.com, but the price parity means that, in fact, a hotel or accommodation establishment cannot price lower than on Booking.com on any other platform, including their own channel. And so this means that you can't get competition from those other platforms because they can't compete on price. They can't say to a hotel, I'll charge you far less commission if you give me a better price. and the hotel can't develop their own platform, which means they become dependent on these platforms, and higher commission fees get charged, and that will affect ultimately the consumer who pays higher prices.
And it definitely puts our local businesses on the back foot on this one. And of course, this highlights the importance then of leveling the playing fields to make sure that everyone is on an equal footing here. But let's talk about some of the remedies that then now need to come into place in order to ensure that such situations are not seen continuously.
Yeah, and maybe just to highlight, a market inquiry is not about finding an abusive situation where someone's deliberately stifling competition. There is certainly conduct that falls into that category, but it is also about the business models that have been developed in the digital economy and whether those business models have a byproduct of harming competition. So in terms of the remedies, on Google, we've got a raft of remedies looking at how to improve the visibility of South African platforms and also small platforms who compete with even large South African platforms. So there are things like a search filter, South African badge or identifier, like a flag on a site that consumers can then purposely use South African sites, but also things like advertising credits and a special carousel that will show stuff relevant to their search. So those are in there. We've got the removal of price parity across a number of platform categories, and then also trying to aid platform interoperability. So in areas like classifieds, just getting access to the business listings has been a problem, and we're addressing that. But probably the biggest area of remedies, and which is an important component of this inquiry, is to look at competition on those platforms. So can small hotels or small accommodation establishments compete on Booking.com with larger ones? Can small estate agents and auto dealers list on these classifieds and get a fair deal themselves? And this is where we've often found it to be lacking. So certainly in areas like classifieds, we're asking for an end to the price discrimination and for big drops in prices for small estate agents and dealers, sort of 50-60% price drops there, which will offer enormous benefits. On Take-A-Lot, they run a marketplace where people sell, and there's thousands of those sellers. And also Take-A-Lot retails its own products. And there is a conflict of interest that needs to be resolved. And so we've put in measures such as, separation of those divisions, the restriction on sharing data, dispute resolution processes that all aim to ensure fair competition on that platform, given its importance.
And the leveling of playing fields is an important one, especially when we look at, some of the smaller businesses, as you say, who are upcoming, who also need to be put on an equal footing. But thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation, because it's, one of those that could easily get lost, but it does a lot for South African brands. And really, it's one to watch. That was the Competition Commission Market Inquiry Online Intermediation Platform Chair, James Hodge.